You know, Professor Dershowitz, I'm not a professor at Harvard, but I do.
You seem to resent that a lot.
But I do teach elsewhere. And when we discuss issues like falsifying information, plagiarizing, lifting whole cloth from other books, I've never heard that called ad hominem. For a serious scholar and a serious academic, those are very fundamental issues.
But when they're false, they're ad hominem.
Okay, no, if they're false, then you dispute them.
That's what
But to characterize them as ad hominem seems really out of court for a professor.
No, they are ad hominem. You said I don't deserve to teach at Harvard. That sounds pretty ad hominem to me.
Professor Dershowitz,
Finkelstein make his case.
You raised that issue. I'll try to address it, and then we're returning to the substantive issues of your book.
First, tell me why I shouldn't be teaching
I'm going
at
to
Harvard.
refer to that.
Okay.
On page 207 of your book, you say that to deliberately misinform, miseducate, and misdirect students is a particularly nasty form of educational malpractice.
Of which I accuse
Now,
Noam Chomsky
I consider what you have done in the book to be a paradigmatic, a quintessential example of misinforming, miseducating, and misdirecting.
So
you go on. Allow me to finish.
Write an article.
Allow me to finish,
Sure.
Mr. Dershowitz. I've been very respectful of your time. On page 213, you discuss the Holocaust fraud by Robert Faurisson. And you write, quote, "There was no extensive historical research," referring to his book.
That's right.
Instead, there was the fraudulent manufacturing of false anti-history.
That's right. And Chomsky wrote, as you know, an introduction to
Please don't
one of
bring
his
in Mr. Chomsky. He can defend himself. We're talking about you and your book.
books.
It was the kind of deception, referring to Faurisson's book, now let me quote clearly,
Right.
for which professors are rightly fired.
I stand by that,
Not
of course.
because their views are controversial, and let me underline this again, but because they are violating the most basic canons of historical scholarship.
Well, let me respond to that.
Now,
If you can compare me to Faurisson, if you can compare Faurisson made up a story that the Holocaust didn't occur.
I'm referring to your
But you have to
standard.
understand the
I have no
context.
interest in Faurisson now. I'm talking about your standards.
Absolutely. I
To
stand by those
miseducate,
standards.
misinform, and misdirect, to violate the standards of historical scholarship are grounds for expulsion.
Absolutely.
So it's
And
not an ad hominem argument. It's using your standard.
No, it's an ad hominem argument.
I'm going to
In
interrupt
fact,
here because I
make an
want
ad
to
hominem
get to
argument
some of
about
the.
Faurisson, of
I want to
course.
get to some of the main points
Yeah, let's
of
try
your
to
book.
do that. That would be
Also,
very nice.
we were intrigued on watching Scarborough Country when you debated Sam Husseini, the
Right.
offer that you made.
Right.
We want to just play it for a moment.
Please.
I'll tell you what, I will give $10,000 to the PLO in your name if you can find a historical fact in my book that you can prove to be false. I issue that challenge. I issue it to you. I issue it to the Palestinian Authority. I issue it to Noam Chomsky. I issue it to Edward Said. Every word in my book is accurate, and you can't just simply say it's false without documenting it. Tell me one thing in the book now that is false.
Okay, let's go to the book, The Case for Israel.
Can I just talk about that
$10,000.
for 1 second?
Yes.
And let me tell you what he came up with. This is really fascinating if you show the rest of the clip. He came up, he said on television, I saw a photograph, or I remember, I said a videotape, of Israeli soldiers aiming their guns at that, whatever, 12-year-old boy who was caught in the crossfire and killed. And I actually upped the offer to $25,000 if he could produce a photograph or if he could produce proof that he had seen that. Why was I so confident? Because German television did a very thorough study of that one particular incident. Let's just spend 1 minute on that incident. What happened is when that child was killed in his father's arms, the nation of Israel went into almost universal mourning. It was as if they were sitting Shiva on one of their own children. A child had died, and it looked as if possibly an Israeli soldier might have shot him. When you contrast that to how Palestinians respond to a child dying in Israel from terrorism dancing in the streets, it's a very striking comparison. Then German television did a study, and they found out that the Israeli soldiers were positioned in a way that it was physically impossible for the bullet from an Israeli soldier to have hit that Palestinian child, and it was virtually certain that the bullet had come from a Palestinian gun. In my view, that's not particularly relevant. When a child is caught in a crossfire, it's a tragic death resulting from the crossfire. Which bullet actually hit him was not relevant. But that was the answer that he came up with.
Norman Finkelstein.
Well, first of all, I want to clarify the monetary issue. Is it now $25,000?
It's $25,000 on that issue.
Oh, just
on
on
the
that
issue.
In general,
right.
it's $10,000.
And let me be very clear what I said.
We heard it. We just saw it on the tape.
Let me be very clear.
I think it's clear.
I then made it very clear. I said afterward, a material, willful distortion of fact.
Professor Dershowitz, it's on tape. We just saw it.
But we're not talking about a spelling mistake.
Oh, no, I'm not
we're not talking about a minor mistake and a footnote.
Far be it for
we're
me
talking
to be
about
so
a serious
right.
material,
Let's
willful
talk
mistake
about
of fact that I deliberately engaged in.
Serious material facts.
Yes, right.
Let's start. Number one, I'm going to first deal with just concrete facts which are not particularly controversial, which can easily be confirmed. On page 80 of your book, you write that according to Benny Morris, between April and June...
Benny Morris being an Israeli
historian. I have a copy of his book here, which I'll hold up.
Right.
2,000 to 3,000 Palestinians were made refugees during the second stage of the flight. Here's the book in front of you.
Yeah.
Page 256. Can you read what the sentence says?
Well, let me read you what I say in my book. In some areas, Arab commanders...
Please
I'm quoting
don't read
from
the
Morris.
whole paragraph.
No, I'm just reading... In some... let me put the context. Chomsky says that he says... Morris does not believe that any Arab leaders told the Palestinians to leave. And I say, in some areas, I quote from Morris, in some areas, Arab commanders ordered the villages to evacuate to clear the ground for military purposes to prevent surrender. More than half a dozen villages, etc., were abandoned during these months as a result of such orders. Elsewhere in East Jerusalem and in many villages around the country, the Arab commanders ordered women, old people, and children to be sent away out of harm's way. Indeed, psychological preparation for the removal of the dependents had begun in 47-48, when the Arab High Command and the Arab League had periodically endorsed such a move in contemplating the future of Palestine. And I say, therefore, Chomsky is simply wrong when he says that there's no evidence, and he says, again at another point, nobody today believes that any of the refugees were told to leave. And so I dispute that by quoting Morris himself.
You seem to have an obsession with Mr. Chomsky, but he's not here. I'm here. Let's look at the next sentence.
I thought I was going to be debating Chomsky today.
Let's look at the next sentence. Please, Mr. Dershowitz, this is serious.
I agree with you.
Read the next sentence. Morris estimates, in your book, I have it right in front of me, the next sentence.
Morris estimates that between 2,000 and 3,000 Arabs fled their homes during this phase of the Arab-initiated fighting.
Okay, can you please read what Mr. Morris wrote?
Well, no, you're talking about one...
Please read what he wrote.
If I have the whole book, I will find for you, if you want to take time...
Norm Finkelstein, can you, if you want the
3,000 people led during this phase.
Can you read the sentence?
Okay, I'm looking at page 256 of Benny Morris's book, Righteous Victims, A History of the Zionist Arab Conflict.
He's referring to Phase 2 now, the same one as you. Go ahead.
And you're talking about right over here.
Altogether, yeah.
Altogether, about 200,000 to 300,000 Arabs fled their homes during the second stage of the Exodus.
There's a big difference between 2,000 and 3,000 and 200,000 and 300,000. Now, you could check this many times, Mr. Dershowitz, but you're really going to have to pay the $10,000.
No.
And I hope you'll allow me to I hope you'll allow me to earmark it for Janine. I would like to give it to Janine.
Let's be sure what the context is of this.
I know the context.
We're talking about a variety
this is not
of
the OJ
phases
trial. This is not the OJ trial. We're not going to play a game.
Well,
we're not playing a game now.
Is your point that you're citing that what you're saying, Norm Finkelstein, is in Alan Dershowitz's book, The Case for Israel? He says 2 to
3,000, and it's 2 to 300,000.
Your response to that,
I argue that 700,000 Arabs.
Don't change the subject, Mr. Dershowitz.
Changing the subject.
We're talking about phase 2, April through June.
Arabs.
Please don't play this game.
Obviously, the phrase 2 to 3,000 Arabs refers either to a sub-phase or is a typographical error.
This is why lawyers have a bad reputation. Because you're playing a game now. I've read the book